January 9th, 1905. Thousands of workers marched peacefully toward the palace. They carried no weapons. They wanted only one thing: bread. The guards opened fire. That single decision killed not just thousands of people, but an entire empire. This is the story of the Russian Revolution, the most explosive political event of the 20th century. The Russian Revolution of 1917 is considered one of the most explosive political events of the 20th century. It wouldn't be wrong to say that in history, no other revolution has had as much impact on the world as the Russian Revolution did. This violent revolution brought an end to the Romanov dynasty and ended centuries of Russian imperial rule forever. During the Russian Revolution, under the leadership of leftist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks seized power. But before understanding the revolution that took place in Russia, it is very important to understand the Russia of that time. So let's first discuss the background of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution may have found its spark in 1917, but the gunpowder had been accumulating for many years. During the 19th century, almost the whole of Europe was passing through important social, economic, and political transformations. At that time, most countries were following a republic, like France, or a constitutional monarchy, like England. But Russia was still living in the old world. Here, the Tsars, which is what Russian emperors were called, were running an autocratic rule. In 1861, serfdom was abolished. Serfdom was, in a way, like a feudal system, where peasants had to work as slaves to the landlords. They were called serfs, and their livelihood depended on the cultivation of a small plot given by the lord. In 1861, this system of serfdom was ended, but even after this, the condition of the peasants did not improve. They still had very little land, and they didn't have the money to develop even that. For the small holdings they were given, they had to pay heavy redemption dues for many decades. Besides this, industrialization in Russia happened very late. It started in the second half of the 19th century. After that, it developed quite rapidly, but more than half of the capital for investment came from foreign countries. Foreign investors were only interested in their own profits. They had nothing to do with the condition of the workers. Russian capitalists, with their insufficient capital, were competing with these foreign investors, and therefore they kept the workers' wages very low. This meant that whether the factories belonged to foreigners or Russians, the working conditions were horrible in both places. Workers had no political rights, and there was no way to achieve even minor reforms. In a way, the Russian state under the Tsars was not suited to the needs of modern times. Tsar Nicholas II, during whose time the revolution happened, also believed in the divine right of kings. According to him, protecting absolutism was a sacred duty. The Tsar had the support of only the upper layers of the nobles and the clergy. Apart from them, the people of the vast Russian Empire did not like him at all. The bureaucracy created by the Tsar was top-heavy, inflexible, and inefficient, whose members were chosen from the privileged class, and not on the basis of ability. Russian Tsars had built a huge empire by conquering diverse nationalities of Europe and Asia. In these conquered areas, the Russian language was imposed, and the culture of the people there was looked down upon. Political parties were prohibited by the government, and secret police were kept, along with strict censorship, to check dissent. To restrict the movement of people in the country, an internal passport system was implemented. Politically, in 1900, Russia was much like the France of 1780. Like France, some thinkers and intellectuals here also started propagating revolutionary ideas. Growth of revolutionary movements in Russia. Even before the 19th century, many peasant rebellions had taken place in Russia, but they were suppressed. Many Russian thinkers during this period were influenced by the developments in Western Europe and wanted to see similar changes happening in Russia. It was through their efforts that serfdom was abolished in 1861. But that proved to be a hollow victory. The hope for gradual change toward a constitutional democratic government was soon broken. Every attempt at gradual improvement eventually failed. In conditions like those in Russia, it was necessary for even a moderate democrat or reformer to be a revolutionary. In the last quarter of the 19th century, a movement started which is called going to the people. Under this, intellectuals started preaching their ideas to the peasants. After industrialization started, worker organizations also began to form, and these were influenced by the ideas of socialism. In 1883, the Russian Social Democratic Party was formed under the leadership of George Plekhanov. In 1898, this party merged with other socialist groups to become the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. But soon the party split on the questions of organization and policy. One group, which was in the minority, favored a party that participated in parliamentary elections, like those in France and Germany. This group was called the Mensheviks. On the other hand, the majority group, known as the Bolsheviks, believed that in a country where there are no democratic rights and no parliament exists, it would not be effective to organize the party on parliamentary lines. The leader of the Bolsheviks was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who is popularly known as Lenin. They began to prepare the Bolshevik Party as an instrument to bring about revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1917 and the name of Lenin are inseparable. Apart from the Menshevik and Bolshevik parties, there was also the Socialist Revolutionary Party, which raised the demands of the peasantry. The revolutionary movement, on socialist lines, was growing in Russia when the Revolution of 1905 took place. 1905, Prelude to Revolution. In 1904 and 1905, Russia had to face a crushing defeat at the hands of Japan. For the first time in modern history, a European power lost to an Asian power. In the midst of this war, a rebellion against autocracy took birth in Russia. It began on the 9th of January, 1905, with a large but peaceful demonstration led by an Orthodox priest named Father Gapon. Along with the workers, their wives and children were also there. These people were going toward the Winter Palace located in St. Petersburg to give a petition to the Tsar. But the guards fired on these protesters, in which thousands of people were killed and thousands were injured. This event is known as Bloody Sunday. After hearing the news of this massacre, strikes and demonstrations started all over Russia, which paralyzed the country. Even some sections of the army and navy rebelled. The sailors of the battleship named Potemkin joined the rebels. During these revolutions, a new kind of organization developed, which is called a Soviet. This was a council of representatives of the workers. They started out like committees to conduct strikes, but soon they became an instrument of political power. Similarly, peasants' Soviets were also formed. These Soviets later played an important role in the Revolution of 1917. Finally, in October, Tsar Nicholas II issued a conciliatory manifesto to calm the rebellion, which gave freedom of speech, press, and association, and there was also talk of forming an elected legislature, the Duma, to make laws. According to the principles in the Tsar's manifesto, Russia would have become a constitutional monarchy like England. But the Tsar soon returned to his old ways. Now, no one in Russia could hope for any gradual reform. The Duma was the first national representative institution in the history of Russia. It did not have much power, but because of it, the emergence of legal political groups and parties did take place in Russia, which included both liberals and socialists. This revolution of 1905 proved to be a dress rehearsal for the revolution of 1917. It aroused the people and prepared them for revolution. The final spark for the 1917 revolution was found in the First World War. World War I and the Russian Empire. In August 1914, Russia entered World War I in support of the Serbs and its French and British allies. The Tsar wanted to fulfill his imperialist ambitions through this war. He was dreaming of annexing Constantinople and the Straits of Dardanelles, but his involvement in the war was soon to prove disastrous for the Russian Empire. The Tsarist state was incapable of fighting a modern war. From a military point of view, Imperial Russia was nothing compared to industrialized Germany. Before this, no country would have faced as many casualties in any war as Russia did during the First World War. By February 1917, along with this, the falling standards of the royal family made matters worse. Nicholas II was completely under the dominance of his wife, and his wife, Alexandra, was under the control of a person named Rasputin. In a way, Rasputin was running the government. In 1915, Tsar Nicholas left the palace and reached the war front to command the Russian army himself. In the absence of the Tsar, his wife, Tsarina Alexandra, began to handle the administration. Alexandra was an unpopular queen. She started firing elected officials. At this time, Alexandra's controversial advisor, Grigory Rasputin, started increasing his influence on Russian politics and the royal Romanov family. Stories of the affairs of Rasputin and the Queen became common among the Russian public. The Russian nobles, troubled by Rasputin's influence, murdered him on the 30th of December 1916. But by then, most Russians had lost faith in the leadership of the Tsar. On top of this, corruption had increased the problems of the people. There was a shortage of bread. The Russian army had to face heavy reverses in the war. The government had no attention toward the conditions of the soldiers on the front. Dissatisfaction started increasing in the whole empire and the army. The situation was completely pointing toward revolution. For a successful revolution, Lenin stated two conditions. The first was that people should understand that revolution is very necessary and should be ready to sacrifice their lives for it. And the second was that the existing government should be in a state of crisis, making it possible to overthrow it quickly. And in 1917, that time had come in Russia, the result of which was the February Revolution. Minor incidents trigger revolutions. In the case of the Russian Revolution, this incident was the demonstration by working-class women for bread, after which the workers' strike started, and soldiers and other people also joined in. In this way, the February Revolution started on the 8th of March, 1917. On the 12th of March, 1917, the capital city, St. Petersburg, came under the control of the revolutionaries, and soon the revolutionaries also took Moscow. You might be wondering if it started in March. Why are we calling it the February Revolution? This is because until February 1918, the Julian calendar was used in Russia, and according to that, the revolution started on the 23rd of February. On the 12th of March, a provisional government was formed by the Duma, and a few days later, Tsar Nicholas abdicated the throne. In this way, the Romanov rule, which had been going on for centuries in Russia, came to an end. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, established a liberal program of rights, such as freedom of speech, equality before the law, and the right of unions to organize and strike. They opposed violent revolution. Along with this, Kerensky, as the Minister of War, continued Russia's war efforts. However, the Russian involvement in the World War was very unpopular among the people. This made Russia's food supply problems even worse. Unrest continued to grow. Peasants started looting farms, and food riots started in the cities. Due to the unpopularity of the provisional government, another revolution soon took place in Russia, which is called the October or Bolshevik Revolution. The people mainly had four demands: peace, land to the tiller, control of industry in the hands of workers, and equal status for non-Russian nationalities. But the provisional government, led by Kerensky, did not accept any of these demands and lost the support of the people. Lenin, who was in exile at the time of the February Revolution, returned to Russia in April. Under his leadership, the Bolshevik Party put forward a clear policy of ending the war and transferring land to the peasants, and gave the slogan, "All power to the Soviets." On the question of non-Russian nationalities, at that time, only the Bolshevik Party had a clear policy. Lenin described the Russian Empire as a prison of nations and declared that no genuine democracy could be established here until all non-Russian people got equal rights. He spoke of the right of self-determination for everyone. The provisional government was assembled by a group of leaders from Russia's bourgeois capitalist class. But Lenin wanted to form a Soviet government which would be directly ruled by the Council of Soldiers, Peasants, and Workers. Due to the unpopularity of the Kerensky government, it collapsed on the 7th of November, 1917, when a group of sailors took control of the Winter Palace. The Bolsheviks and their allies seized government buildings and established their control over other strategic locations in Petrograd. On the same day, the meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviets took place, and they assumed full political power. They formed a new government, of which Lenin became the head. The October Revolution was almost entirely peaceful. According to reports, only 2 people were killed in Petrograd. However, immediately after this, a civil war started in Russia, in which the Tsar's army officers organized an armed rebellion against the Soviet state. Troops of foreign powers, such as England, France, Japan, and the United States, also supported them. The Civil War continued until 1920, in which the supporters of the Tsar were called the White Army, and the Soviet troops were called the Red Army. Finally, the Red Army of the Soviet state was victorious. Consequences of the revolution. The first achievement of the Russian Revolution was that it ended the autocracy. Along with this, it also destroyed the power of the aristocracy and the church. The Tsar's empire changed into a new state, which is called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. The policy of this new state was made in the direction of achieving the socialist ideal, from each according to his capacity to each according to his work. Private property was abolished. The motive of private profit was removed from the production system. Economic planning was started by the state so that a technologically advanced economy could be built as soon as possible and inequalities in the Soviet could be reduced. Working became necessary for everyone because there was no longer any kind of unearned income to live on. The right to work was made a constitutional right, and it became the duty of the state to provide employment to everyone. Apart from this, special attention was also given to education. Within a few years of the revolution, the Soviet Union emerged as a major power in the world. Conclusion: the Russian Revolution is like an important turning point in world history. It not only changed Russia forever, but also influenced the whole world. Its impact is seen for many decades to come. Whether it was the Western nations' fear of communism or the Cold War, somewhere the roots of all events emerge from the Russian Revolution.